Gus woke to the dark and the cold. The cottage smelled of old wood and the low-tide rot that never quite left the walls, even in summer. 3 winters had passed since Ellie died, but the house still held her scent in the bedroom curtains. Or maybe he imagined it. He didn't know anymore. Sometimes he thought he smelled her hand cream, lavender, and something sharp like pine. And sometimes he smelled nothing at all. Barrett he pushed back the wool blanket. His feet hit the floorboards, and the boards creaked. They always creaked in the same spot, 3 steps from the bed. He had meant to fix that once, back when he still owned a toolbox he used for more than opening cans. Now he didn't mind the noise. It was company. The cat, Salty, lifted her head from the foot of the bed. She was orange and fat and old, her fur matted in patches she wouldn't let him comb. She yawned, showing her small yellow teeth, then jumped down with a heavy thud that shook the frame. "Morning," Gus said. Salty didn't answer. She never did. Gus pulled on his trousers and the flannel shirt he'd worn the day before. It smelled like wood smoke and sleep. In the kitchen, he filled the kettle and set it on the gas stove. The flame caught with a soft pop that he felt more than heard. He stood there, waiting, listening to the wind worrying the window panes. The Atlantic had been loud last night. A storm had come through around midnight, throwing rain against the glass like handfuls of gravel, bending the pines behind the cottage until he thought they might snap. The kettle began to whine. The pitch rose slowly. Gus took the blue tin of coffee from the shelf and spooned grounds into the pot. The smell rose up, bitter and brown, cutting through the damp smell of the house. When the kettle screamed, he poured the water in a slow circle. Steam wet his face. He filled his mug, the blue one with the chip on the rim, and sat at the table. Ellie's chair was empty. It was the chair by the window, the one that looked out at the lighthouse. She used to sit there with her knitting basket between her feet, her glasses sliding down her nose, her hair pinned back with a silver clip he still found in drawers. The chair was wooden, maple, worn smooth on the arms from decades of touching. He kept it there, angled toward the window. He didn't sit in it. That felt like crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. Salty rubbed against his ankle, her body heavy and warm through his sock. He tore a piece of bread and buttered it, leaving a smear of yellow on his thumb. He licked it off. The butter tasted like salt. Everything tasted like salt here. The coffee burned his tongue. He drank it anyway. Outside, the sky was turning gray-pink over the water, the sun coming up somewhere behind the clouds. The Point Mercy light stood against the sky, black and silent, its white paint glowing faintly in the gloom. The light hadn't turned in 3 years, not since they decommissioned it. The Coast Guard ran an automated beacon on a steel pole at the end of the bluff now, flashing every 4 seconds. But the old tower remained. Gus remained. He was 74. His hands had brown spots on them. Liver spots, the doctor called them, as if his organs were leaking out through his skin. His knees ached before he even stood. The loneliness was not a sharp thing anymore. It was a weight, like a wool coat that got heavier when it rained. He wore it without thinking. It was just his clothes now. He finished the bread. Salty stared at him with her green eyes, unblinking, until he put the crust in her bowl. "Greedy," he said. Salty ate the crust. Her purr was loud in the quiet kitchen. Gus washed his mug in the sink. The water ran cold, even in June. He looked out the window at the empty chair, then at the lighthouse, then at the sea. He didn't let himself think about Ellie for too long in the mornings. If he did, he might go back to bed. Instead, he put on his boots, lacing them with fingers that felt stiff, and cleared his throat. The sound died in the room. He opened the front door. The Atlantic air hit him, cold and damp even for summer, carrying the smell of iodine and wet stone. It woke him up better than the coffee. He stepped onto the porch. The wind tugged at his cuffs. Down below, the waves worked against the rocks. He could hear them even from here, a slow grinding that never stopped, never slept. Salty followed him to the door but stopped at the threshold. She didn't like the wind. She turned back toward the kitchen, tail high, and jumped onto Ellie's chair. Gus watched her settle into the wool blanket Ellie had left draped over the back. The cat kneaded the fabric with her front paws, eyes half closed. "Traitor," Gus said. He pulled the door shut. The lock clicked. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the lighthouse, then began to walk. He walked the 50 yards to the lighthouse. The grass was wet and bent under his boots, leaving dark marks where his heels struck. The tower rose above him, white paint peeling in curls that showed gray primer underneath, the black iron gallery like a crown set crooked on a king. The door at the base was heavy oak, banded with steel that had gone orange with rust. Gus took the key from his pocket. The museum board had given it to him 2 years ago when they turned the place into a kind of landmark. They called him a volunteer. He called it coming home. The key turned. The lock was stiff. He shouldered the door open and the smell hit him. Brass polish, diesel fuel, old salt, and something else. Stone that had been closed up too long, breathing its own breath. It smelled like his youth. It smelled like 30 years of midnight watches. He stepped inside. The spiral stairs rose up into darkness, a twisting shadow. 138 steps. He didn't count them anymore, but his knees did. Each step was a twist to the left, iron grating worn smooth by a century of boots. He started up. His right knee popped on the 3rd step. It always did. He kept his left hand on the central column, cold iron, flaking paint rough against his palm. His right hand trailed the outer railing. He tapped it every few steps. It was a habit from the old days, when he carried oil and wicks up the tower and needed to know the railing was there in the dark. The sound rang out, a dull clink, swallowed by the stone. His breath came harder by the 50th step. By the 100th, his thighs burned. He paused at the landing below the gallery, put his hands on his knees, and coughed. The sound echoed down the stairwell, bouncing off the walls. It sounded like someone else. He climbed the last steps and pushed open the hatch. The gallery wind hit him, sharp and clean, smelling of nothing but sky. He stepped out onto the iron deck. The Fresnel lens filled the center of the tower, dark and silent now, its prisms like a giant beehive of glass. The brass fittings still caught the morning light. He could see his distorted reflection in the lens, warped and stretched, an old man made of glass and rainbows. Gus walked to the rail. Below, the rocks jutted into the sea like broken teeth. White water churned around them. To the north, the town of Mercy sat cupped in the hills, too far to make out faces. A few gulls hung in the wind, crying out. Their voices were thin and angry. He stood there for a while, his hands on the cold iron. The diesel smell lingered from the last time the generator ran, a ghost of machinery. The Coast Guard had taken the mechanism when they automated everything. Now the lens was just a museum piece. But standing here, Gus could almost hear the clockwork turning, the weight chains rattling, the beams sweeping across the dark. He could almost feel the floor vibrating under his boots, the tower alive. He stayed until his fingers went numb and his ears ached from the wind. Then he patted the railing twice, turned, and went back down. Gus left the lighthouse and walked the narrow path toward the cottage. The wind had picked up. It pushed against his back, cold and damp, smelling of salt and the low-tide mudflats. He pulled his collar tighter. The boathouse sat at the edge of the marsh, gray boards silvered by weather. The door sagged on its hinges. He hadn't been inside since the fall, maybe longer. He stopped and looked at it. The padlock was gone. He couldn't remember if he had removed it or if it had rusted away. He pushed the door open. It scraped against the floor. The smell hit him first. Motor oil. Wet canvas. the faint, sweet rot of old wood. Dust hung in the light from the single window. A workbench cluttered with jars of rusted screws and bolts. A spare buoy, faded orange, leaned in the corner. He stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under his weight. He ran his hand along the bench, feeling the grit. His fingers found a shelf. On it, a pair of gardening gloves. Hers. He picked them up. The leather was stiff, cracked along the knuckles. They still held the shape of her fingers. He turned them over. A small hole in the left thumb. Dirt embedded in the creases. He remembered her in the garden. Tomatoes, mostly. She would kneel in the dirt, her back to him, talking to the plants. Not just watering or weeding. Talking. She'd tell them they were looking strong today. She'd ask them if they needed a little more sun. He never understood it. They were plants. They didn't hear. But she did it anyway. He put the gloves back on the shelf, careful to place them exactly as they were. He stood there a moment longer. The boathouse creaked around him. Outside, a gull cried. He walked back toward the cottage. The path took him past the garden plot. It was a mess. Weeds had swallowed the raised beds. Tall grass bent in the wind. A tomato cage lay on its side, half buried in dead leaves. He slowed but did not stop. He thought about clearing it, pulling the weeds, turning the soil, planting something, anything. But his feet kept moving. The cottage door was just ahead. He went inside and closed it behind him. The storm had stripped the beach. Gus walked the tide line below the bluff, his boots sinking into the wet sand with each step, pulling free with a sucking sound. The air smelled of kelp and rotting bladder wrack, of things the ocean had chewed and spit back. Broken shells glittered in the gray light, pink and white and the color of old bone. A dead crab lay on its back, claws curled, being picked at by flies. The waves were still high, pushing foam up the sand and sucking it back with a hiss that sounded like a kettle left on the stove. He walked slowly, head down. His knees hurt from the climb down the bluff trail, but the movement helped loosen them. He kept his eyes on the debris line, the rack line, where the sea left its offerings. After a storm, the ocean gave things back. Bottles, boards, rope. Once, a ship's bell that now hung in Carla's nook. Ellie had loved beach walks after weather. She said the ocean was cleaning out its pockets, deciding what to keep. He heard the foghorn from the automated buoy offshore, a low moan every 30 seconds. It sounded lost. It sounded like him. He saw the bottle at the base of the bluff, half buried in sand, green glass the color of old wine or deep water. It was round, thick, with a cork stopper. Barnacles crusted the cork and the neck, white and sharp as teeth, rough as stone. He picked it up. It was heavy, weighted with sand and water inside. He shook it. Something inside rustled, dry and light. Paper. Gus turned the bottle in his hands. The glass was scratched by sand but intact, thick enough to survive. The cork was swollen and black with mold, sealed with wax that had gone the color of rust. He looked out at the sea, then back at the bottle. It felt warm from the sun, or maybe that was just his palms growing hot. He tucked it under his arm and walked home. The foghorn sounded again behind him. He didn't look back. The bottle knocked against his ribs as he climbed the trail. The kitchen table was pine, scarred by 40 years of knives and hot pans and the ringed marks of 10,000 mugs. Gus laid down an old dish towel, faded blue with a pattern of ducks. He put the bottle in the center. Salty jumped onto the counter and watched, tail twitching, her eyes following the glass. He got his tools from the drawer, a pair of needle-nose pliers, a flathead screwdriver, a butter knife with a wooden handle dark from use. He worked the cork carefully. It crumbled at the edges, dry and rotten, releasing flakes into the towel. The smell that came out was old salt, ancient, like the inside of a cave, or the breath of something that had lived on the bottom for decades. It stung his nose. He gripped the cork with the pliers and pulled. It came free with a soft pop, releasing a breath of air that smelled of the deep ocean, cold and dark. He tipped the bottle over the towel. The paper inside was rolled tight, wedged in the neck. He used the screwdriver to tease it forward, bit by bit, his hand trembling slightly. The paper was fragile, almost see-through, the color of weak tea. Blue ink faded to the color of a robin's egg or a bruise just beginning to heal. He flattened it gently on the towel with his fingertips. The edges crinkled like autumn leaves. He recognized the handwriting before he read the name. Ellie, her E's looped like she was in a hurry. Her Y's dropped below the line. He knew this writing from grocery lists, from notes left on the fridge, from the birthday cards she used to make him because store-bought ones were a waste of money. His hands began to shake. A coldness started in his chest and spread outward, down his arms, into his gut. He gripped the edge of the table. The letter was dated, June 14, 1979, 45 years ago. He had been 28. Ellie had been 26. They had been married 4 years. They had lost the baby 3 months before this date. He didn't want to read it. He had to read it. Gus sat down. The chair creaked. Salty bumped her head against his elbow, then his hand, demanding to be petted. He held the paper up to the light from the window and began to read. June 14, 1979. To our little one. I am sitting in the gallery of the lighthouse. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, and the moon is bright enough to write by. Your father is asleep below in the keeper's quarters. I can hear him snoring through the hatch. He sounds like a bear in a den, all rumble and sigh. I am writing this by the moonlight because I do not want to wake him. I do not want him to know I am up here crying. We lost you 3 months ago, March 2nd. The doctor said it happens. He said we can try again. He said all the things people say, as if you were a bad roll of dice and we just needed another throw. But you were real. You were already real to me. I had names picked out. I had dreams of your hands, your face, and then you were gone, and nobody wanted to talk about it. Your father held my hand in the hospital, and he didn't say a word. That was his way. He carried it inside him, same as me. But I think if I look at him too long, I will break, and he will break, and we will both drown in this house with all this love and no place to put it. So I am giving my grief to the sea. I am putting it in this bottle, and I am throwing it into the dark water from the gallery rail. The ocean is big enough to hold it. The ocean has held worse things than a mother's sorrow. But I want the sea to know you existed. You were not nothing. You were not a mistake or a maybe. You were wanted. Your father is a good man. He is strong and quiet, and he loves without making noise. He will not say your name because he thinks it will hurt me, but I see it in his shoulders, how he carries you when he climbs the stairs. He carries you too. I wish I could tell him that I see it, but I don't know how. We are both so good at silence. We think it protects each other. I hope one day we learn to speak again, maybe through another child, maybe through time. I hope we have others. I hope I get to watch your father teach a little girl to tie a knot, or a little boy to paint a door. I hope our house fills with noise, but even if it does, there will always be a space where you should be. That is okay. That is love. It makes room. If you ever find this, it means the sea brought my love back when I needed it most. Or maybe you needed it. Either way, you were loved. You are loved. Love, Ellie. Gus read it a second time, then a third. The words began to blur, not from tears yet, from the impossible weight of them. His chest hurt, a real squeezing pain behind his ribs, like someone had wound a winch too tight. He pressed his hand there, felt his own heart knocking. He remembered that week in 1979. The bathroom tile had been cold. Ellie had bled on it. He had cleaned it with a rag while she slept. Neither of them had said anything when she woke. They had simply moved around each other. He had climbed the tower stairs 11 times that first day. 11. She had washed the same teacup over and over at the sink. The grief had been a third person in the room, heavy, breathing. They had fed it with their quiet. He had thought he was being strong for her. He thought silence was what she needed. Tears came. Not a sob, just a hot, steady leak from the corners of his eyes. He did not wipe them. They fell onto the paper, dark spots on the blue ink. He did not care. Salty jumped onto the table. The old cat's paws were heavy. Thump. She pressed her forehead to Gus's wrist. Her fur smelled of dust and fish oil. Gus buried his fingers in it. Salty purred, loud and ragged, like a motor with a catch in it. Barrett sat there until the kettle went cold, until his legs ached, until the rain stopped and the windows turned silver with afternoon light. He folded the letter carefully along the crease. His fingers trembled. The paper made a small sound, like a sigh. He placed it in his shirt pocket over his heart. He stood. His chair scraped the floor. Salty lifted her head but didn't follow. Gus walked down the short hall to the bedroom. The door was open. He went in. The closet door was closed. He opened it. Her clothes still hung there. He had never cleared them out. Couldn't. The fabric held the shape of her. A blue house dress with tiny white flowers. A wool coat, thick and heavy. He touched the sleeve of the coat. The wool was rough under his fingers. He remembered her wearing it on winter walks to the lighthouse. The wind would whip her hair across her face. She'd laugh and pull the coat tighter. He looked up. On the top shelf, a shoebox. He reached for it, felt the weight. He carried it to the bed and sat down. The mattress dipped. Dust rose from the box when he lifted the lid. Inside, photographs. Black and white. A few in faded color. He picked one up. Ellie on the bluff. Her hair blowing across her face. She was laughing. The lighthouse stood behind her, white against a gray sky. He remembered taking that picture. The wind had been so strong he could barely hold the camera steady. He found another. Their wedding. A courthouse. No guests. Just the two of them and a judge. Ellie wore a simple dress. He wore a borrowed jacket. They looked so young. He stared at the photo. Her smile. His hand on her back. He traced the edge of the picture with his thumb. He put the photo back in the box. Closed the lid. Stood and placed the box on the shelf. He shut the closet door. The dresses disappeared. He sat on the bed. The mattress dipped where she used to sleep. The springs groaned. Salty padded in from the kitchen and jumped up beside him. The cat settled with a sigh, head on Gus's knee. Gus rested his hand on her warm fur. He didn't move for a long time. The walk to town was 3 miles. The road was wet from the morning rain. Gravel crunched under his boots, a steady rhythm. The air smelled of pine sap and low tide, that particular rot of kelp left behind by the waves. His pocket felt heavy. The letter pressed against his chest with each step, a small rectangle of heat. He passed the harbor. The boats were in, rocking gently against the tires on the docks. A man in yellow overalls hosed down a deck. The water ran pink. Gus kept walking. Carla's nook sat where Harbor Street turned to cobblestone. The bell above the door jangled when he pushed inside. The smell hit him first. Coffee grounds, cinnamon, old paper. Under it, something fried from the kitchen. The floorboards were worn smooth in the center from decades of feet. The postal counter stood to the left, scarred pine and brass scales. Behind it, Carla sorted mail into slots, her mouth moving silently as she read names. Her gray hair was wound tight in a bun. A few strands escaped at her temples. She wore the red cardigan with the pills on the sleeves. the one her daughter had sent from Portland. She looked up. Her hand stopped moving. "Gus!" He didn't answer. He walked to the counter. His boots left wet marks on the wood. He reached into his pocket. His fingers shook. He pulled out the letter and laid it flat between them. The paper was soft now, handled too much. Carla looked at it, then at his face. Her expression shifted. Something opened behind her eyes, a door unlocking. "Oh," she said. "Oh, Gus." She picked it up. Her fingers were thick-knuckled, the joints swollen. She read slowly. Her mouth tightened. Her chin dimpled. When she finished, she pressed the paper to her chest. Her eyes were bright. "She wrote this," Gus said. His voice sounded like gravel in a tin cup. Carla nodded. She reached under the counter and found a tissue. She didn't use it, just held it in her fist. "Sit down," she said. "I don't want to sit." "Then stand, but take the coffee." She poured a cup from the glass pot behind her, pushed it toward him. The mug was chipped at the rim, white with a blue stripe. The coffee was black and smelled burnt, the way it always did after noon. Gus wrapped his hands around it. The heat hurt his palms. He didn't pull away. Carla came around the counter. She moved carefully, her knees stiff. She stood close. She smelled of lavender soap and the peppermint discs she kept in her pockets. "Ellie told me once," Carla said. Her voice was low. "It was the Christmas party, 1980-something. She was drunk on gin. Not silly drunk, sad drunk. She said she gave her grief to the sea, threw it in from the North Pier in November, because she didn't want you to drown in it too." Gus looked at her. His hands tightened on the mug. The coffee sloshed. "She said you were already carrying enough," Carla continued. "The lighthouse, the weather, her. She wanted you to think she was strong. She thought if you saw her break, you'd break too. And then what would hold the two of you up?" Gus felt the words land, one by one, like stones dropped into deep water. He looked down at the coffee. The surface trembled. "She was strong," he said. "She was," Carla said, "but she was also scared, same as you." Gus thought of the stairs, the 11 climbs in one day, the way Ellie had folded the towels so precisely, the edges aligned like architecture, the way they had not touched for 11 days. He had thought she didn't want him to see her pain. He had thought his own pain would burden her. So they had built a wall of silence, brick by brick, thinking it was a shelter, thinking it protected the other. He wanted to be angry, that she had told the sea and Carla before him, but his anger was old. It had no teeth anymore, only sadness, and now, strangely, relief. He thought of the North Pier in November. The wind would have cut through her. She would have thrown the bottle with that fierce motion she had, the one she used for pitching apple culls into the compost. He wondered if she had cried after, or if the cold had frozen the tears before they could fall. "I didn't know," he said. "Compartments. No," Carla said. "That's the tragedy, isn't it? You were both trying to save each other, in the dark, with no map." She put her hand on his. Her skin was warm and papery, spotted with age. The bones beneath were delicate, bird-like. She squeezed once. "Let go." He looked at her hand, the wedding band she still wore, even though Hank had been gone 12 years. She followed his gaze, didn't explain. She didn't need to. "Read it again," she said. "Here, now, with me." Gus picked up the letter. His hands were steadier. He read it aloud. His voice was rough, quiet. The words filled the small space. When he got to, "You were wanted," his voice cracked. He stopped, swallowed, continued. When he reached "Love, Ellie," he stopped again. The bell above the door tinkled as someone came in, a teenager in a raincoat. Carla didn't look up. Neither did Gus. "She loved you," Carla said. "That never stopped. Not for a second." Gus folded the letter, put it back in his pocket. He looked at Carla. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. A small, fierce smile. "Potluck tomorrow," she said. "You bring that photo of her you keep in the drawer. The one from the summer fair. I want to see her face." "Friday," Gus said. "Friday," Carla agreed. He turned to go, then stopped. "Thank you." "For what?" "For keeping her secrets. For giving them back." Carla's mouth wobbled. She swatted his arm. "Get out of here, Gus, before I cry on your good shirt." He went. The bell jangled behind him. The air outside tasted of salt. It tasted clean. He stood on the step for a moment, breathing it in. His chest still hurt, but it was a different hurt now. Not a knot, an opening. Dusk came slowly. Gus climbed the lighthouse stairs. His legs burned. The spiral was tight. The iron railing was cold. The stairs creaked under his boots, each step sending a small vibration up through his soles. He climbed past the service room, past the clockwork, up into the gallery. The door stuck. He shouldered it open. The wind hit him. It always did. It smelled of the deep Atlantic, of nothing and everything. The lantern room smelled of ozone and old metal. The Fresnel lens sat dark now, replaced by an automated beacon years ago. But in the dusk, the glass still caught the last light. It threw prisms across the walls. Ellie used to love that. She would bring him dinner up here sometimes, in a tin pail. Soup, stew. She would watch the colors dance while he checked the wicks. He walked to the rail. The letter was in his hand. He unfolded it. The paper snapped in the breeze. He ran his thumb over the edge. It had softened. The ink was Ellie's. He knew it by the way the Y looped, by the slant of the E. He knew it like he knew the sound of her footsteps on the cottage floor. He read it again. Her voice in his head, warm and scared. "I was drowning too," he said. The wind took his words. He didn't care. He said them louder. "I was drowning too, Elle. And I thought if I held it, if I didn't let you see, you'd stay afloat." He looked down at the town. The lights were coming on, yellow squares in the blue-gray dusk. Carla's nook, the bait shop, Julia's old schoolhouse, now a library. He could see the smoke from chimneys. He could hear a dog barking, far off. "Thank you," he said, "for writing it down, for letting me find it." He folded the letter. He didn't put it in his pocket. He held it in both hands. The sea churned below, black and silver in the fading light. For 40 years he had thought the sea was a thief. It had taken their child. It had taken their words. It had taken Ellie in the end, her heart giving out, though she had died in bed and not in the water. But the sea had kept this. It had held her love in glass and brought it back. Not the grief. The grief had been the water they drank every day. The sea had returned the love. He felt it then, a loosening. His shoulders dropped. He hadn't realized how high they had been, how tight his neck had been, for decades. It wasn't gone. The grief was still there. But it was no longer alone. It had company now. Her words. Her truth. He stood there until the stars came out, until his fingers went numb. Then he went down. Back in the cottage, Gus picked up the phone. It was heavy, black, rotary, the kind nobody had anymore except him and Carla. He sat in the chair by the window. The cushion was flattened from years of use. He dialed Julia's number. The clicks were satisfying. Whir, whir, whir. She answered on the third ring. "Dad?" "Jules. Is everything okay? It's late there." "Everything's okay," he said. "I found a letter. From your mother." A pause. Then, "What kind of letter?" "The kind she wrote to the baby. Before you. The one we lost." Another pause. He heard her breathing. "Oh, Dad. I wanted you to know," he said. "And I wanted to ask, when are you coming?" "August," she said. "The 15th. We bought tickets." "Good," he said. I have lighthouse stories for the grandkids, the real ones, not the ones I made up. Julia laughed. It sounded wet. They'd like that. Dad, are you all right? I'm alone, he said. He looked at Salty, who was washing her paws on the armchair. But I'm not lonely in the same way. I love you, Julia said. Love you too. He hung up. The cottage was quiet. The wind outside made the shutters tap. It was Friday, potluck night. He walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where he kept Ellie's things, her hairbrush, a shell, the photograph from the summer fair 1977. She was holding a blue ribbon for her pie. Her face was tanned, her teeth were white. She looked at the camera like she had a secret. He put the photo in his shirt pocket. He walked to Carla's. The light was on. He could hear voices inside. Laughter. Someone had brought a fiddle. He pushed open the door. The bell jangled. Carla looked up from the casserole dish. She saw the photo in his hand. She smiled. There's my girl, she said. The room smelled of clam chowder and cornbread. Someone had lit the wood stove. The heat pressed against his chilled skin. He took off his coat. His fingers were stiff. Carla handed him a plate, macaroni and cheese. The top was browned. He took a forkful. It tasted sharp and creamy. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. He hadn't noticed. He sat at the long table. Someone poured him cider. It was warm and spiced. He drank it. The cinnamon burned his tongue. He didn't mind. Frank leaned back in his chair, coffee cup in hand. I'm telling you, he said, that fish was this big. He stretched his arms wide. Took my line and ran. Never saw it again. The men around him laughed. They'd heard the story before. Frank told it anyway. Carla came out of the kitchen carrying a blueberry pie. Steam rose from the crust. She set it on the long table and began cutting slices. The smell of warm fruit and sugar drifted across the room. A couple approached Gus. Summer people. The man wore a new flannel shirt. The woman had a camera around her neck. You're the lighthouse keeper, right? The man asked. Was, Gus said. Retired now. We'd love to hear about it. How did the old light work? Gus set down his fork. It was a weight-driven clockwork. Had to crank it every few hours. Big chain. The light itself was a kerosene lamp with a Fresnel lens. Prisms. Bent the light into a beam you could see for miles. The woman leaned forward. You had to stay up all night? No, just wound it at bedtime and again before dawn. Checked the wicks. Kept the glass clean. Simple work. Simple, the man said. Sounds like a lot of responsibility. Gus shrugged. You did what needed doing. Carla came over with plates of pie. She set one in front of Gus. Their eyes met. She smiled, small and knowing. She saw something in him, something that had been missing. He looked away. A child tugged at his sleeve. One of the town kids. Freckles, missing front tooth. Is the lighthouse haunted? Gus looked down at the boy. No, he said. It's just old. The boy ran off. Gus picked up his fork. The pie was warm. Blueberries burst on his tongue. It tasted like summer, like the sun on the bluff, like Ellie standing in the gallery, light pouring through the prisms, her face lit with color. He could see her there. Not a ghost, just a memory, sharp and clear and full of light. He took another bite. The pie was sweet. He ate slowly. Around him, the room buzzed with talk. Salty's tail thumped against his leg. Gus chewed and swallowed and let the taste of summer stay on his tongue. He took the photo out and set it on the table where everyone could see her face. He touched the edge of the frame with his thumb. He was still alone in the cottage. He would be, most nights. But the space where Ellie should be was no longer empty. She had filled it with words, with love, with the truth he had needed to hear. He was still alone, but not lonely in the same way.